Welcome to Knife Chats. If you like this video, please take a moment to leave a comment. Thank you.
A while back I did a video on my top 5 favorite slip joints, and in there I mentioned the Swiss Army knife, but not as one of my top 5 because I just put it in a different category, and I said someday I'll need to do a video on my top 5 favorite Swiss Army knives. And so that's what this video is kind of attempting, but you'll find out real quick that I really can't decide on what my top 5 favorite Swiss Army knives are. First, let me say that I have a wide assortment of Swiss Army knives. The majority of the ones I have are in 91mm and 58mm, but I do have some in other sizes. As a general rule, I tend to collect the ones that are 91mm, 58mm, and a reasonable, healthy selection of 108mm and 111mm. And so, size-wise, that's pretty much it. I mean, also 93mm and 84mm. So, if I were just going by size, it would probably go 91mm, 58mm, and 111mm. So that's the 3 most popular sizes that I collect. And when it comes to collecting, the 2 that I primarily collect are the Spartan and the 58mm Classic or Classic SD. Now, the primary reason I collect the Spartan is because they come out in all sorts of limited editions. For instance, here's one for Bavaria, here's another one for Switzerland. And also the other reason I collect the Spartans is because it's basically the closest thing to the original Swiss Army officer's knife, and that's why I collect it. And it's the genesis of every other Swiss Army knife out there. And like I said, I collect them because there's a lot of limited editions in the Spartan. And recently, it seems like the limited editions are starting to show up on Tinkers, especially in the United States. And so I'm collecting a lot of Tinkers grudgingly, but I would have much rather if they would have just kept with the Spartan, which the main difference between the Tinker and the Spartan is the Spartan has a corkscrew and the Tinker has the Phillips screwdriver. Blade-wise, the blades on the Spartan are your can opener, your cap lifter screwdriver, the main cutting blade, and the smaller blade. And then you also have for back tools the reamer or sewing eye reamer and the corkscrew. So there's your Spartan. And of the 91mm knives, that's the principal one that I collect, is the Spartan. And in the 58mm, I typically collect the limited edition classic SDs, and because every year they come out with 10 different ones. Now, some people collect every one that comes out every year. They get the whole set of the 10. I just collect the ones that I like within the set, so I guess I'm just not that passionate as some people are. And I know that if I was collecting everyone in the series, then the collection would be worth more. But I collect the ones that I like. This one's through the Swiss Knife Shop, so it's not one of the ones that Victorinox lists as a limited edition, but mostly I collect the ones that are out of Victorinox. It's like there's, I think this one's called Spacewalk. I don't remember what the bicycle one's called. And we got these are from this year. This is Alps Love, and I think I've already done a video on the Yodelehi Moo knife because I like cows. And then here's another one. Here's Hear No Evil, See No Evil, Speak No Evil. Not in the right order, but little monkey knife. I'll have to do a video on all of my classic SDs and the limited editions. And I collect them simply because they're relatively inexpensive, usually under 20 bucks. And you've got a large selection to choose from every year. So it's just kind of a fun thing to do. But basically all they are is your typical classic SDs. So you have your little blade, a little pin blade, and then you've got your nail file with the screwdriver tip, and your pair of scissors, and then tweezers, and your toothpick. Now, a lot of the newer classic SDs, let's see, they're starting to give tweezers with a red tip on there, so you know it's one of the limited edition ones that Victorinox is doing. So that's kind of cool too. So that's the classic SDs that I usually collect. Of course, when it comes to an EDC 58mm, the one I carry is the Signature, which is basically a classic SD that has a small ink pen, retractable ink pen in the handle. And that's because I need a pen to write with. And the way you work that to write is you take the file, you pull it out, and then you can easily write with the pen. Now, this usually comes with a pair of tweezers, but I need a toothpick more than I needed the tweezers, and my tweezers in my other EDC, so I don't really need the 2 sets of tweezers, but 2 toothpicks are nice to have. So I swapped out the tweezers that came with it with a toothpick. But that's the 58mm that I carry, the Signature. Now, Victorinox made the German Army knife along with several other companies, and I carried the German Army knife for a couple years. The one I carried was actually by CCM, but I do have one by Victorinox, and it's a really cool knife, and I like the 108mm frame. Matter of fact, I wish they were still making 108mm frames. This is a combo tool, so it's a can opener, cap lifter, and screwdriver, and also a wood saw. It's got a cover for the blade so you don't cut yourself when you're using that screwdriver or when you're trying to open a can or something. Also has a nail file or a match striker there. And then you've got your main blade. Nice big main blade. And a corkscrew on your German Army knife. You always need a corkscrew, right? And then the reamer. And I really like this. I think in the they also make them in red handles, and then it's the Safari, and this one would be the Safari Trooper, the civilian version of it, and it's got a red cross here. I've also got like the Solo Plus and the Hunter. I'll do a video on the 108mm that I have. I really like the 108mm knives. I wish they still made this frame. These were the first ones that came out with the nylon handle, and yeah, this is definitely one of my favorites, the German Army knife, especially when it's made by Victorinox. And my first EDC for a Swiss Army knife was back in the 1984, 85, somewhere around there, and that was the Woodsman. Now, the Woodsman is the same as the Huntsman, except it lacks tweezers and toothpick. Now, it's basically got the same blades that you find on the Spartan, with the addition of a wood saw and a pair of scissors. Let's see if I can get those scissors open easily. And a pair of scissors. And I think the Huntsman is probably the #1 seller in the Victorinox line. I think they say that for the 91mm, the Huntsman is the one they make the most often. And it is a really good everyday carry knife, and I carried this one for a good 10 years, so definitely one of my favorites, especially for an EDC. So far I'm down 2 EDCs, the German Army knife and the Huntsman, actually 3 when you throw in the Signature. And one other knife that, this is my current EDC, and I love this one, and that's the Explorer. And the difference between that is the Explorer has the end-mounted Phillips screwdriver. One of my favorite tools on a Swiss Army knife is the end-mounted Phillips screwdriver. I hate the one that is in the middle of the frame. I don't think it has the reach that I want. Plus, I'm always worried that when I'm twisting, I'm screwing up the frame. So this way, I'm doing less torque on everything, and it just works better. And you've got so much more reach with the end-mounted Phillips screwdriver. And got the magnifying glass on this side. I use this magnifier glass quite often. And what I've started doing with all of my EDCs these days is the first thing I do is swap out the scales so that I can get the plus scales. So I have the extra ink pen and the plus scales. And usually when you get plus scales, you also get the small little screwdriver that goes into the corkscrew, and this is great for tightening up your eyeglasses and a few other things. So that's why I always get plus scales on my EDCs now. There's also a hole here for a little pen, like a straight pen. I don't bother with that. I never seem to need it, and it's always getting lost on me. So the Explorer is probably my favorite knife right now for everyday carry, and it's because I really need the magnifying glass and the Phillips screwdriver. Plus it has the scissors, which I like, and these days I do not need the wood saw as often as I need the Phillips screwdriver. So that's why I switched from the woodsman slash Huntsman to the Explorer, because I could use that Phillips screwdriver more than the wood saw. So there's my favorite EDCs, at least the Huntsman, the German Army knife, the Signature, and the Explorer. Now another favorite of mine is the Passenger. I don't carry this one. It's a retired knife, but basically it's the Explorer missing the scissors. So you notice here, one layer thinner because there's no scissors in it. So it makes it a little bit more friendly in the pocket. And this is a knife I wish they would come back with, and if they did, I might start carrying this one in place of the Explorer, because my Signature has a pair of scissors, so I don't really need two pair of scissors all the time. So this would be a great knife for EDC, but I don't carry it simply because it's a retired knife. But this is probably one of my favorite retired Swiss Army knives, the Passenger. And special props has to go to my Evo cow knife. This is by Wenger. Obviously it's retired now. You can still get the Evo scales on a knife. It'll be a Victorinox knife, but you're not going to find cow scales on anything. So this is another one of those collectible knives that I really just like. Obviously a souvenir of Switzerland. They also had this in cheese and chocolate, but I just grabbed the cow knife first, and then by the time I got around to the other ones, they were already out of stock. But that's okay. I really like the cow knife, and one of the things I really like about it also is the fact that it has a nail file in place of the small blade, and 85 millimeters. And this is just this is one of my favorite knives in my entire collection. As an individual knife, is the Evo frame or anything special to me? It is kind of nice. I like it. It feels good in the hand and everything. So I probably will pick up a couple Evos and try them out. But really, this one is just mainly because of those cow scales. I just like the knife because of that. As you can see, I've got a thing about cows, and there's a limited edition for 2019 that has a cow, so I'll be picking that one up also. And this brings us to the last knife I'm going to be talking about, and that is the 111 millimeter Hunter. Now, I like the 111 millimeter knives. They're 4 3/8 inches long, and the frame size is really good, and they're great for hiking and great for outdoor work and everything. And the ones I like best are the ones with the slide lock on the back for the main blade, and the blade will lock open. Some people don't like the slide lock. I do. They've gone to a liner lock with the big thumb hole for easier opening, one-handed opening, but I like the slide lock. I don't need the one-hand opening eye hole or anything like that. And what I really like about the Hunter, though, is these olive drab scales with the elk on them. And that's really what drew me to it. And it's just a really great knife. It's one of the few knives in the 111 millimeter line that has a combo tool, so can opener, screwdriver, and cap lifter wire stripper. And on the other side, you have a gutting blade. So you've got this serrated hawkbill type of blade you can use for gutting animals or for cutting boxes open or whatever. And I really like that. So that's why I like the Hunter. The other blades you have on it are a saw blade, and like I already showed you, the locking main blade with the slide lock. This is my favorite 111 millimeter knife. I've got about 7 other ones, all different, and I really like all of them. The one I normally carry with me out in the field is the Outrider, but this is definitely my favorite of the 111 millimeters, the Hunter. So to review, I collect Spartans, especially limited edition Spartans. I'm starting to collect Tinkers reluctantly because it seems like the limited editions are moving over into the Tinker line. I also collect classic SDs, and when it comes to collecting, those are the principal knives I collect, Spartans and classic SDs. And finally, when it comes to Wenger, I don't have many of them, but my favorite is definitely the Evo cow knife, and that's because of the wonderful cow print scales and the file on the backside. So like I said, I'm not sure if this really falls into like a top 5 favorite or something else, but it definitely tells you what my favorite Swiss Army knives are, both my favorite Swiss Army knives to collect versus my Swiss Army knives that I like to carry. And I'd love to hear from you on what your favorite Swiss Army knife is that you collect, and versus what Swiss Army knives you have that you actually carry because you enjoy carrying them. And if it happens to be the same knife, that would be cool too. But for me, it just seemed to fall into certain ones that I just wanted to collect, and then certain ones that I just found more useful, and those are the ones that I carry. And like I also have said, and you've probably seen in some of my videos, I've got quite a few Swiss Army knives, and some of them I never carry, but I just had to have in the collection anyway. So hope that helps, and I hope that answers the question for those people who are asking, what are my top 5 Swiss Army knives? Sorry that I couldn't be a little more specific.
But wait, there's more.
Now you would think with the camp knife being my favorite slip joint knife, that I would have also picked the Swiss Army soldier's knife as one of my favorite Swiss Army knives. But I didn't. And there's really 2 reasons why. And the first reason is because the Swiss Army soldier's knife is essentially a camp knife, and it is not a design by Karl Elsner. The design of the original Swiss Army knives was through a contract through the Swiss Army, and they sent the information out to all sorts of knife makers, and the people first awarded the contract were actually German knife makers. Germany had been making the knives for the Swiss Army for some time already, and this particular knife, not this one, but the earliest of the Swiss Army soldiers' knives that looked similar to this, were actually made in Germany. And a year later, they started being made by Karl Elsner and other Swiss knife makers. And that's mainly the reason why I did not pick it, because it's not a design of Karl Elsner or Victorinox later. It was a design that predates it, and so I skipped this one, and not through any fault. I can understand why anyone who does collect Swiss Army knives could very well pick this as their favorite knife, but I just lumped it in with all of my other camp or scout knives instead. But then you have this knife, which is the Spartan. Before that it was a standard, and then before that it was a Swiss Army officer and sporting knife, and before that it was just a Swiss Army officer's knife. And this knife was designed by Karl Elsner, and it's the knife that really put him on the map as a knife maker. The Swiss Army officer's knife, not the Swiss Army soldier's knife. And as you know, I did pick the Spartan as one of my favorite Swiss Army knives. Now later, the Swiss Army soldier's knife has changed. In 1956, they adopt one with A-lock scales on a 93 millimeter frame. But even this was not unique. They basically took the Pioneer and modified it by removing the keyring here. Otherwise, it's just the Pioneer with the same blades and everything, just missing the key ring. And this was the Swiss Army soldier's knife after 1956. And while it looks cool, it was not in any way a new idea, because back in 1944, the U.S. military did something very similar. They took their camp knives that they were using in World War II, and because the handle material was falling apart in the humid jungles in the Pacific, they replaced them with aluminum handles, and so you end up with a slab-sided knife that looks very much like your Swiss Army soldier's knife. Has the same four blades also. The only difference is they decided to keep a shackle because it made sense to them. So 1944, the U.S. military adopted an aluminum-sided pocket knife for its soldiers, and in 1956, the Swiss Army pretty much did the same thing. So it was not a novel idea. Great scout knives, great camp knives, great soldiers' knives, but not the best of the Swiss Army knives to me. And then when we get to the latest of the Swiss Army soldiers' knives, well, this is basically the same as a German Army knife. The only difference is it has dual density scales and it has the Swiss cross instead of the German eagle. Great knife. I do like it. I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't like it. So it's just not my favorite among my Swiss Army knives, but definitely something that I felt every Swiss Army knife collection should have. So there are knives that should be in a Swiss Army knife collection, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be my favorite knife. Hope that clarifies why the Swiss Army soldiers' knives are not among my favorite Swiss Army knives, but they do make it, at least the early ones with the aluminum handle and the other ones with the fiber handles, and if I could get one with the wood handle, it would definitely be among my favorite scout knives. And maybe that's what I need to do a video on my top 5 favorite scout knives.
Okay, now I'm done. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Knife Chats, and if you did, please like and share it with your friends. Comments are always welcome. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode of Knife Chats is up online. Thanks again. Hope to see you soon.